yourself doesn't exist. I know it's a strong statement, and you're probably thinking something like, well, I'm watching this video and I can hear what you have to say and I understand it. And therefore I am, and therefore myself exists. However, so far for the duration of this video, the only seconds when yourself actually existed was when you stepped out of your thinking process or your emotions, and you took maybe a second or two to self-observe and verify that you exist, and then yourself went back into those thoughts or emotions or whatever was going on in your head. So existence of yourself is not continuous. You may also argue that, well, I remember everything that has happened since the start of the video to the present moment, and therefore myself was actually continuous for this period of time. However, this is not true. What is continuous is your memory, and your memory is more of a recording device. It's not an active device. So your memory truly is consistent, and this is why you remember most of the things that happen. However, yourself is not consistent. This inconsistency causes difference in your actions throughout your day, throughout the time of your life, throughout everything. Of course, I don't want to discard the importance of memory. It's very important, and without continuous memory, self is not possible. But the presence of memory does not always indicate the presence of self, and it's also important to understand. And here is a practical example to highlight that. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you promise something, but then you do not fulfill that promise? Or, for example, when you decided that you want to do something and then you don't do it. Let's say you forget, or then you say, maybe I'll do it another day. Or maybe you find yourself in a situation where you set a date and you don't actually really want to go to the date, and you just want to do something else or go with someone else. If you find yourself in these situations, it's very much an indication of self that is not continuous. It takes actions on your behalf, but it doesn't actually have the interests of your entire self in mind. So one day you decide one thing and then the next day you don't do it, or you make a promise and then you don't actually fulfill that promise. And it's all kind of willy-nilly. So if self actually existed, would it want something like this to happen? After all, we live in the 20th century and our day-to-day life is actually quite predictable. There cannot be like an earthquake or some kind of rain or something that interrupts you every single day. Those events still happen, but majority of time, most of our environment is actually quite predictable. So what stops us from having this continuous line of making a decision and then following through on that decision? The problem frequently is not that we are not hardworking enough, or not that we don't want to do the things that we have promised. The problem that we have is that there are multiple selves that reside in every individual throughout the day. So these multiple selves share your body and they have shared memory. But even while sharing such important assets of you, they may still act completely independent from one another. Now, granted, most of their actions should somewhat coincide with each other, but there could be some selves that are very harmful to you and that can operate your memory or your body in a way that's harmful to the rest of those cells. And some of those cells can even be artificial. They may not belong to you. They could appear because of your upbringing or maybe social group or maybe advertising. There could be many different ways in which an artificial self can occur. And this is actually especially well illustrated when somebody is lying. If you've ever seen a video of a person who was lying but got caught, normally what they say is that, but I thought this and then, but there's that, but don't you understand, I wanted that. And all of their excuses do sound pretty ridiculous to any observer. And they are truly ridiculous, no doubt about that. But what you can also see in their eyes is almost this like genuine emotion that they really are kind of not guilty. And one explanation for that is because at the time when they were taking action, one of those selves has convinced them that that negative action is actually good, or they should take it, or that they are allowed to take it for whatever reason. And that self that is currently dealing with the situation that they got caught is an entirely different self. And this is by no means a call to remove personal responsibility, because I know you guys, you're going to take this self thing and going to run with it, and you're going to say, well, I identify as self 10 individuals, whatever, and you're going to rob the store, and then you're going to say, well, now I want to go to church, and now I'm going to kill people, so don't do that. So the purpose of this episode is to bring awareness of this phenomena, because most of the modern Western psychology and philosophy is built upon the idea that self exists, it continues, and it is essentially by itself is the source of some issues, or maybe happiness if we have it. And they actually don't even consider for a second a situation where there is no single unified self whatsoever. And I'm not a medical professional by any means, so I want to disclose that. But I do want to consider one disease from this different angle. And this disease is ADHD, where a person first wants to do one thing, and then they want to do another thing, and then another thing. And if we consider this disease from the angle of multiple selves, it becomes apparent that it's multiple selves taking control over the same individual in a short period of time, and therefore they cannot complete anything. And the modern medicine, what it does is it prescribes Adderall and other medications, but Adderall is essentially an amphetamine, and supposedly it brings the focus together and it allows certain self to become the main executioner of actions in the best case scenarios. In the worst case scenarios, it just gives a significant energy boost, and then a person may sometimes have even worse symptoms and just do multiple things with more energy, but those things may not necessarily still bring the desired outcome. So if we consider it all from this perspective, would it mean that modern medicine, instead of actually healing those multiple selves and unifying them, makes things worse and sort of puts people on medication? And to be honest, it essentially is a drug. It's a controlled substance. if somebody were to sell amphetamine or Adderall in the street, that would be probably a federal offense. I don't know what the schedule on it is, but it's likely 1 on amphetamine. So essentially, the medicine offers drugs as a solution, versus it would be very interesting if the modern medicine was to consider this standpoint and actually incorporate it in some way, so that maybe there could be some approaches that they could come up with for multiple self-unification. Because some of those selves can be thrown away and they can be completely artificial. If I'm going to be real dark here, also, artificial selves within a person can be created through propaganda or through societal pressure. And it's interesting how society first inserts these artificial selves into us that have some desire or craving for, let's say, I don't know, a car or money or whatever there is. And then modern medicine puts us on drugs to alleviate this initial issue. Sadly, as a consequence of not having a single unified self, we also can come to a conclusion that we do not have constant will, because at one moment the will of one self defines us, and in a different moment the will of a different self defines us. And so if we think of will as ability to resist some of our emotions or thoughts in order to execute on something that we need to execute on, then this ability withers with more selves that take control. Also, the direct consequence of having multiple selves is being easily influenced. Because when a person has multiple selves that want completely different things, there are certain external influences that can sometimes see those selves. It could be, for example, some skillful con artist or somebody who knows people well, and they can see those different selves inside of an individual, and they can bring up that necessary self, or they can see which self is operating this person at this specific moment in time, and they can provide this self with a sense of sort of emotional security and importance, and every one of those fractured self wants to be important. It wants to be the master after all. And this self can be very easily influenced. Then some person can make a decision based upon that which they later on regret. Another example of it could be the influence by commercials, by certain influencers on Instagram that take those selves that are not necessarily the best of us and influence them to want or to need something. Most likely those are going to be artificial selves instilled by society. And the illusion of an individual self can be very, very strong because of this shared memory, first of all. And second, we identify very strongly with our thoughts and emotions. Frequently, if a person is not emotional, but they are very thoughtful, they think that they overcame emotions and they become much stronger and they became themselves. But in a lot of ways and very frequently, you can see that smart people, while not identifying with their emotions, identify with their thoughts, and they think that their thoughts are very, very important. Or sometimes professionals, let's say, if they don't identify with their emotions, they very strongly identify with their work, and naturally so, because work is something that we do most of the time. And their self, sort of in a sense, becomes this work. Or sometimes people still remain emotional beings, and actually very frequently they remain so, and they identify with their emotions. And so each one of those aspects, kind of this process of identification, dissolves that particular self in that specific moment in time. And we forget our self. We forget it. And it's one of the reasons why another self can take place so easily. And I do realize that all of this sounds like doom and gloom, but there are ways in which artificial selves can be deconstructed. And there are ways in which separate selves can be merged. And overall, this whole process is called self-unification. And self-unification, what? Oh, no more? Okay.